Let's look at the food on your plate right now. Some of the most expensive meals were once garbage. We are talking about scraps unfit for human consumption. Now they cost more than a monthly mortgage payment. Here are 9 poverty foods that became luxuries. Number 9 is the absolute ugliest scam in the ocean. Meet the monkfish, otherwise known as the sea devil. For centuries, this thing was considered absolute garbage. Fishermen in Europe and America actually hated catching them. The fish has a massive head and razor-sharp teeth. It looks like a nightmare that swallowed a toad. It was so repulsive that fishmongers refused to display it. They would cut the tail off and throw the head away. They didn't want to scare off the paying customers. For years, this meat was sold for pennies or discarded. It was considered a bottom feeder, fit only for peasants. But then the marketing geniuses got involved in the 70s. Chefs realized the tail meat had a firm texture. It didn't flake apart like a normal white fish. They started calling it the poor man's lobster. It was a brilliant way to trick the middle class. You get the texture of lobster without the price tag. But the rebranding worked a little too well. Suddenly, everyone wanted a taste of this ugly monster. Demand skyrocketed, and the price followed immediately. Today, monkfish is a staple in high-end fine dining. You will see it on menus for $30 a plate. The poor man's label has completely disappeared. Now, it is just another overpriced luxury item. It is the same fish that used to be trash. The only difference is a better public relations team. Fishermen stopped throwing them back into the water. They started targeting them specifically for the payout. It just proves that people eat with their eyes closed. If you saw the whole fish, you would probably run. But put it on a white plate with sauce, and suddenly it is worth its weight in gold. Number 8 is the chicken wing miracle. This is the biggest hustle in the history of meat. Before 1964, wings were essentially trash. Butchers considered them the least desirable part of the bird. There is barely any meat on the bone. It is mostly skin and cartilage and bone. They were sold for pennies to soup factories, or they were ground up into cheap animal feed. Restaurants would throw them away at the end of the day. But then a mistake happened at the Anchor Bar. This dive bar in Buffalo, New York got a wrong delivery. They ordered chicken backs and necks for sauce, but the supplier sent them cases of wings instead. The owner, Teresa Bellissimo, didn't want to waste them. She decided to deep fry them and add hot sauce. She served them as a free snack at the bar. The drunk patrons absolutely lost their minds over them. It was the perfect salty snack to sell more beer. Word spread across the city like a grease fire. Suddenly, every bar in Buffalo was serving fried wings. Then the sports bars got involved in the 80s. They needed a cheap finger food for football games. Wings were the perfect vehicle for selling cheap lager. The price of wings started to creep up slowly. Then the supply chain realized they had a gold mine. Today, wings are often the most expensive part per pound. You go to a sports bar and pay $15. You get 6 tiny wings that used to be garbage. The wholesale price has increased over 1,000%. It is a masterclass in turning waste into profit. We are literally paying a premium for the scraps, and we thank them for the privilege every Sunday. The chicken hasn't changed, but the marketing sure has. Number 7 is the prison food lobster. This is the most embarrassing history lesson for rich people. If you order lobster today, you are flashing cash. It is the ultimate symbol of wealth and status. But in the 1800s, it was poverty food. The early settlers in New England actually hated it. Lobsters were so abundant, they washed up on beaches. They piled up 2 feet high after a storm. The smell of rotting shellfish was absolutely terrible. People called them the cockroaches of the ocean, because that is essentially what they look like. They were considered unfit for human consumption. They were ground up and used as fertilizer for crops, or they were used as bait to catch real fish. The only people who ate them were the desperate. It was the primary food source for prisoners and slaves. Indentured servants actually put a clause in their contracts. They demanded not to be fed lobster too often. There was a law in Massachusetts about this. Prisons could not serve lobster more than 3 times a week. It was considered cruel and unusual punishment. Imagine eating something so much you hate it. The shells were buried in the backyard to hide the shame. If you had lobster shells in your trash, you were poor. Everything changed with the invention of the railroad. Train managers realized inland passengers didn't know the stigma. They served it as an exotic, rare seafood item. People from Ohio thought it was delicious and fancy. They were willing to pay top dollar for the experience. By the time the truth came out, it was too late. The price had already established it as a luxury. Overfishing killed the supply and drove the price higher. Now we pay $50 for a sea bug, and the prisoners are eating bologna sandwiches instead. Number 6 is the free bar snack that started a war. Today, we know oysters as fancy aphrodisiacs. You go to a nice restaurant on Valentine's Day. You pay $4 per shell for raw slime. But in Victorian London, oysters were literally everywhere. They were the 19th century equivalent of potato chips. They were so cheap that the poor ate them daily. Street vendors sold them right out of wheelbarrows. They were cheaper than beef or poultry or pork. Bars in New York City had a brilliant strategy. They gave oysters away for free to paying customers. The saltiness made people thirsty for more beer. It was the original free peanuts business model. Charles Dickens even wrote about how poverty and oysters went together. If you saw oyster shells, you knew you were in the slums. So what happened to make them so expensive? Industrial pollution and sewage destroyed the oyster beds. New York Harbor used to be half oyster reefs. We dumped so much garbage, we killed them all. Scarcity turned a street snack into a rare delicacy. Now you have to wear a suit to eat them. And you pretend to like the taste because it's expensive. Number 5 is the Peasant brisket of Texas. If you go to a barbecue joint today, bring your wallet. A pound of prime brisket can cost $30. People line up for hours just to get a slice. But brisket used to be the cut nobody wanted. It is a muscle from the chest of the cow. It supports 60% of the animal's body weight. That means the meat is incredibly tough and chewy. Rich people wanted the tender steaks and ribs. They threw the tough brisket to the poor ranchers. It was popular with Jewish immigrants and enslaved people. They figured out the secret to making it edible. You have to cook it low and slow for 18 hours. That breaks down the connective tissue into gelatin. It was a labor of love, born out of necessity. For decades, it was cheap food for working-class families. Then, the craft barbecue movement exploded on Instagram. Hipsters discovered that low and slow tastes amazing. Demand went global, and prices hit the roof. Now, the trash cut is the most prized meat, and the people who invented the recipe can't afford it. Number 4 is the gentrification of quinoa. This is a modern tragedy for the people of the Andes. For thousands of years, quinoa was a staple grain. Farmers in Bolivia and Peru ate it every single day. It was cheap, nutritious, and easy to grow there. Western culture didn't care about it at all. Then, some health guru decided it was a superfood. Suddenly, every salad bar in Los Angeles needed it. The demand from the US and Europe went vertical. The price of quinoa tripled in just a few years. This was great for the exporters making money, but it was a disaster for the local population. The people who grew it could no longer afford to eat it. It became cheaper for them to buy imported junk food. They started eating processed noodles instead of their healthy grain. We literally bought the food out of their mouths because we wanted a healthier salad for lunch. It is the definition of global economic irony. A poverty food became a luxury status symbol, and the people who discovered it got priced out. Number 3 is the cat food known as bluefin tuna. If you love sushi, you know this pain personally. A single piece of fatty tuna or otoro costs a fortune. You can pay $20 for one single bite. But until the 1970s, it was considered trash. In Japan, red tuna meat was looked down upon. They called it shibi and thought it tasted metallic. The high-fat content made it spoil very quickly. Before refrigeration, it would turn brown and smell terrible. Rich people in Tokyo refused to touch the stuff. They only wanted white fish with a clean taste. So what did they do with the giant tuna? They literally ground it up for cat food. Or they buried it in the ground as fertilizer. Samurai actually considered it unclean and low class. The transformation happened because of airplanes and freezers. In the 70s, cargo planes returned to Japan empty. They had dropped off electronics in the United States. Someone had the bright idea to fill them with tuna. They rebranded the fatty belly meat as toro. Marketing campaigns convinced people that fat was flavor. Suddenly, the bloody meat was a global sensation. The price went from pennies to astronomical levels. In 2019, a single tuna sold for $3 million. That is not a typo, it was $3 million. We are eating the exact same fish Samurai threw away. We just have better ice chests and marketing teams. It is the ultimate example of supply chain manipulation. We convinced ourselves that scarcity equals deliciousness. Now we pay a week's salary for a fish stick. Number 2 is the great oxtail scarcity. This one hurts because it is still happening right now. Oxtail is exactly what it sounds like. It is the gelatinous bony tail of a cow. Historically, butchers couldn't give this stuff away. It is almost entirely bone with very little meat. Rich plantation owners took the steaks and roasts. They gave the tails and feet to the enslaved people. It became a staple of soul food and Caribbean cooking. Generations of grandmothers perfected the slow cook method. They turned a scrap part into a rich stew. It was cheap filling and full of collagen. You could feed a whole family for $1. But then the Food Network ruined everything. Chefs started putting braised oxtail on fancy menus. They realized the gelatin gives sauces an incredible texture. Social media foodies started posting viral videos. Suddenly, everyone wanted to try the authentic experience. The price shot up from $2 to $15 a pound. That is more expensive than some cuts of steak. And remember, you are paying for mostly heavy bone. The meat-to-bone ratio is terrible for the consumer. People who grew up eating it can't afford it anymore. It has been gentrified right out of the pot. The butchers are laughing all the way to the bank. bank. They are selling bone weight for the price of gold. Number 1 is the fish jam called Caviar. This is the ultimate symbol of the 1%. It is synonymous with private jets and super yachts. But in the 1800s, it was bar food. American rivers were absolutely teeming with sturgeon. The Delaware River was so full of them it was annoying. Fishermen considered them a nuisance that tore their nets. The eggs were harvested in massive industrial quantities. It was so cheap that saloons gave it away for free. It served the exact same purpose as peanuts today. The heavy salt content made men drink more whiskey. You could walk into a dive bar and eat buckets of it. They even shipped it to Europe labeled as American Caviar. It's sold for pennies a pound on the streets. But humans are greedy and short-sighted creatures. We overfished the sturgeon to the brink of extinction. Within a few decades, the population collapsed completely. The free snack became the rarest food on Earth. Supply dropped to almost zero and prices exploded. Now, a tin the size of a coin costs $100. We essentially ate an entire species into luxury status. It is not expensive because it tastes amazing. It tastes like salty fish jelly and ocean water. It is expensive because we killed all the parents. That is the dark truth behind the luxury price tag. We value things only when we are about to lose them. And that is why a free bar snack is now black gold. These foods prove one simple economic truth. Value is nothing more than a collective hallucination. We decide what is trash and what is treasure. Marketing teams play us like a cheap fiddle. They take the scraps off the floor. They give it a fancy French name, and they sell it back to us for a fortune. Next time you see a high price tag, ask yourself if it's actually rare, or if you are just paying for the story. If you enjoyed this expensive menu, smash that subscribe button for free. It is the only thing inflation hasn't ruined yet. I'll see you in the next video.